this is what I want to do. Like, if you were to think from our like sparse conversations that we had up to this point,
Yeah.
if you were to like take a guess at like what question I'm gonna ask you right now to start this conversation, what do you think I'm gonna ask you?
What am I passionate about? Who are you and
Yes,
what are you passionate about?
let's go. I
Yeah.
need to know those two questions right now, please.
Yeah, that's the questions I ask right away on my show. I mean, I interview people that are pursuing careers based on their passions. That's like part of what I do, anyways. And I think when you do something you really care about, something you're passionate about, rather than something that's just like a paycheck, you're a lot more fulfilled with your life. It gives you kind of meaning. So who am
Absolutely.
My name's Chris Johnson. I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about 90 miles east of Minneapolis, to give people an idea where that is. And I own a skateboard shop. That's like where everything came from. I opened that when I was
Wow.
23. I'm turning 32 here shortly. So it's been quite a while. That was like my dream from, when I was a little kid. I've always skateboarded. So that was the first
So
first
cool.
dream, and that's called Passion Board Shop. And then after my shop turned 5, I kind of, a lot of entrepreneurs find a space where they're like, I got to have something new to work on. And so that's
Hmm.
when I had the idea for the show. And so the shop I kind of used as like a clubhouse to inspire kids and be a mentor kind of a thing, more than like a
Mm.
store. That was kind of the
Hmm.
point, was to be like this cool community spot.
Hmm.
And through the years, I saw these kids like growing up, and I got to have a positive impact on them. And through the lens of the show, I really just wanted to expand on that, I guess. And so instead of talking to one or two kids at a time, now I can share stories with people that potentially thousands or tens of thousands or whatever number of people could be inspired by, and could gain or could be positively affected by. So I'm passionate about helping people and helping people find ways to incorporate their passions into their lives, so that way they have more fulfilled lives. Does that make sense?
Bro, it makes so much sense and it resonates so deeply with me because of the fact that I that's so relatable. Is like what drives you and what motivates you is making a positive impact. And it's the exact reason why I left working at Verizon like several years ago as an engineer
That was my
and
last
became a
job
middle.
too. Was Verizon.
Oh, oh, get out,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
That's wild. Wow, wow. Man, yeah, leaving there, becoming a middle school math teacher because I love education. I love working with students. And now, having a business of my own where I can tutor kids and mentor them, which is one part of what I do in addition to my show here and my music and things like that. But that's so cool. Like, here's the thing, Chris. Like, I love being able to have these conversations, and I specifically only like I found out about you through your conversation with Ian Martin Allison,
Yeah,
who's incredible, and
absolutely.
I'm right, just such a talent and so well spoken and like inspiring, I guess is the word. I remember just a lot of things that he shared in our conversation about a year ago that that kind of mirrored, kind of what he shared in your talk with him in terms of just being a positive light kind of thing, which was really really dope. But I found out about you through the cool Instagram feature that's a few months old now, the collaborative, collaboration feature, which I was very excited about when I saw that this was a thing. I was like, this could be huge,
Yeah.
to be able to facilitate these types of connections. And since then, we had a couple conversations, but I purposely did not want to know that much about you.
Sure.
Because like how dope is it to hear like I knew when you were mentioning like going to the shop and stuff like that, I was envisioning, I don't know, I didn't know that it was a skateboard shop, first of all.
Oh,
Even though
sure.
I think you mentioned, you may have mentioned it in the chat, but I kind of forgot that. But the idea of having something that you're passionate about and then being able to like sort of segue that into helping people and mentoring youth and stuff like that resonates deeply with me. So I got to commend you on that. How much do you like? How much do you love that? Like the times where you're able to make those connections with these kids and see them over the next few years grow and share with you how much of a positive impact is made in their lives.
Dude, it's crazy. I mean, like the person I had my logo redone, a little while ago, right? And the
Hmm.
graphic designer that did that, I've known since he was like 12, and he's like
Wow,
25 maybe.
so
He
cool,
was the
man.
little kid at the skate park when I was like 19 that I would show up and he'd have to show me whatever new tricks he had learned, right? And
Yeah.
so like I'd been a mentor kind of friend, of his, and I'm friends with his dad too. And
Hmm.
then when I opened my shop, he was in, I don't know, graduating high school or early college or whatever. Now, years down the road, he's graduated with a degree in graphic design. Like that's what he does full time, and he's crushing it. And I had him as a guest on my show back in, I don't remember, season 3 or 4 or something, a while back. But I interviewed him for the show because I wanted to feature and talk about him because I think his story is really inspiring. And then not long ago, I hired him at his like actual professional rate to do the rebrand of my show. You know,
Awesome.
and
Yeah.
so being able to see that progression and that growth and be able to actually help and work with him is really, really cool. And I have like a lot of those types of stories come through. That's what's really motivating about it. It's never been about the money, you know? And I think like you understand when you worked at Verizon, there's only so much money you can make that like matters. And you make beyond a certain paycheck and it doesn't seem to really matter. If you got a 10% or a 15% increase on your pay, it doesn't really affect you all that much. You kind of have enough money to buy the basic stuff that you want anyways. Realistically, you can't take that much time off, so it's not like you can go on more vacations if you make more money anyways. You know what I mean? Your happiness doesn't really change. So then you start like changing your thought process of like, well, so what's the point then? Like, what do I want to be doing? And money isn't, you know, maybe the reason you want to do it. So that's when it kind of drove, you know, and I had a lot of existential things happen in my life during that time frame. My parents split up, my dad had a heart transplant, I had my first child, and you know, a lot of these things that kind of like made me think about my mortality and what legacy I would leave, kind of a thing, you know, which kind of inspired going that direction. But really the show is just like the natural progression of it. You know, I had hit a point with my shop where at 5 years I kind of felt like I did what I set out to do. Like I built this community spot that's like well loved and all these kids go to, and I felt like it was at a time where I could almost hand it off to like a manager, you know, to still provide that space and do all these events and do all this cool stuff. But I felt like it was time for me to do a little bit more. So I'm on the Parks and Waterways Commission with my city. Like I'm an appointed city official, so I do things, you know, that way. I paint murals and stuff around my town and do a lot of artwork things. And then the show has grown to be like a pretty big thing. It's on a couple of radio stations where I live and in my zone anyways. Awesome. You know, it's a fairly big thing. And I've interviewed a lot of people. I'm just right now putting out season 9. There's 10 episodes a season. So quite a few episodes, probably about the same number you've put out at this point.
I mean, that's right in line. I'm at like 91 myself. So that's like very much right in line with that. So right away, I know I kind of alluded to this before when we first started chatting, and like I gotta be on an episode when I fly out there or when you fly out here. We're gonna make that happen at some point. I can already like there's a certain special thing where I talked to someone. I was talking to someone yesterday who I was a guest on his show. And it was very similar where I only knew surface level about him. I knew he was into music, and I knew he had a podcast similar to mine, similar to yours. Yeah. And so we were chatting, and then, you know, during the conversation, I found out that he's I don't remember if it's middle or high school, but he's a teacher for like 16 years. So he's also an educator, someone who cares deeply about, you know, impacting the youth and things like that. Yeah. And so we're just talking for what could have been, you know, several hours, but I got the text from the wife that was like, an hour and a half is up. Like, I need you up here to help out with the baby. I was like, I totally understand that. We'll kind of do, you know, a follow up to this at some point in the future. But it's so cool being able to connect with people that you kind of align with, because what I've learned over the years is I still have like my closest friends. We're still tight, but we don't see things. I don't want to say we don't see things the same way. We have different interests. So when I talk to them about some of the things that I'm working on, sure, they're happy for me. Sure, they're excited and they're a listening ear. But does it resonate with them? Probably not. To the point where if I talk to you or others who are in the creative space who are doing things similar and who undoubtedly, you know, probably traverse some of the same challenges. Like one of the biggest challenges for me right now is knowing that social media, and I was talking about this at length yesterday, but social media is something that I want to be not nearly as present on platforms anymore, just because undeniably the amount of happiness that I have when I do take a break from Instagram and YouTube Studio, which is my main platform, it's undeniable that I'm much happier. But as a content creator, we do need to have, I believe, right, a presence there. So figuring out that balance and knowing that, like, when I have a day that goes by where I just look at the day and I'm like, damn, like I was on Instagram and on YouTube Studio way too long today, and I know I feel it. It like sucks like the energy out of me. And so kind of traversing that a little bit. Have you experienced either something similar to that or anything else that you feel like is like a challenge for you that you're trying to figure out along your journey?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two things to that. One, I wanted to address the first thing you were talking about, and it's all based on perspective, you know. So I end up becoming good personal friends with a lot of guests from the show, and it's because, you know, if you think about it, how often do you sit down and have a very intimate hour plus long conversation where you're really focused and talking to somebody, like seeing them and talking to them? How often do you really do that with somebody? Not very often, right?
Very rarely.
And
Yep.
not very often when you do have a conversation like that, does the recipient of the conversation, the other participant, have any perspective on what you're talking about? You know, like you said, they're happy for you, but they don't really understand like why. They don't get it. They don't understand how much work went into this thing. They don't understand why this achievement means something to you. So that's why those conversations, you know, mean so much. And when I started doing the show, I thought it was like, you know, I'd been in the skateboarding industry for so long. I thought the skateboard industry, this like sense of family was like something really special to just that industry. And I found that that's really not the case, as cool as that is, you know, that camaraderie is really based around the fact that we're both passionate about the same thing, right? Is we're both passionate about skateboarding. So that's why that camaraderie is there. But somebody that does something that they're passionate about for a living, or that's like their main focus in life for their career, that connection is kind of the same. Right? It's almost deeper actually, because there's so much more that's being put into it. So that's like where that comes in. So I just wanted to mention that. But the social media thing is kind of unavoidable at this point. I think because social media is the best form of advertisement. Like everyone can agree. That's why there's so much money being put into it. It's targeted. It's, you know, it's all how you use it though. It depends, right? Now, if you want advertising to be a big part of what you do, then naturally you have to spend a lot of time in it, and it will benefit you for sure. You know, if you put 5 hours a day into your Instagram, you will see that your Instagram will grow and you'll get better analytics. You know, you'll get more likes on posts or, you know, those types of things. But it just depends on like, is that where you value putting your time the most? Or would you, you know, prefer to put more of your time into the content creation itself rather than the promotion of the content creation? Would you rather do other forms of advertising just because those are better for your mental health? Would you rather be you know, contacting radio stations and trying to do that thing where you're talking in person like that, or going, you know, to different events or something locally where you're handing things out and talking about things? So it just depends on how you want to spend your time. I don't think that many people enjoy what social media is like from a business standpoint, because really, like, I'm sure you're like me, you don't aimlessly scroll. I never do. You know, when I'm on Instagram, it's intentional and it's for business reasons, and that's why I'm able to make a lot of really cool connections. You know, like I just lined up an interview with a player for the Green Bay Packers, which I'm a massive Packers fan because Wisconsin, that's like our thing. You know, like that's the sport we pay attention to. Granted, Milwaukee Bucks are in the playoffs right now and they're crushing it, but
Giannis,
you know, for years the Packers have been the thing, right?
Sure.
I would not have made that connection without Instagram. I'd just DM the guy, and that was it. You know, so like it's a powerful tool, but you have to be able to use it effectively. I do think it's almost impossible these days to grow like a base where you can have a career around something in entertainment related, such as a YouTube space or something, without putting a lot of time into social media. You know, I don't know of very many people that do it effectively that way. I mean, if you can afford it, you could pay a social media manager.
Right.
But I don't think you can totally neglect it and still grow in the space. That would be really difficult.
Hey, that's so well said, man. It's like one of the things where if you're in the space like we are, like having the awareness of it is significant enough to make sure that, like you said, the aimless scroll and stuff like that, the things that you are, the value that you're getting from social media versus the things that you are giving up, you know, your attention and things like that, can be tricky, right, if you're not paying close attention to that. So that definitely makes a ton of sense. And
you can learn too, like how to use your time effectively, right? Not to like interrupt you, but there's ways to do that. You know, if you spent, say, 30 minutes once a week, which overall is a very small amount of time for how much time people spend on social media, right? If you dedicated 30 minutes a week to just like looking up on YouTube, how does Instagram work in 2022? Or how does YouTube work in 2022 or whatever? So that way you can like continue to learn from people about like, this is how algorithms and this is how things are working, right? Yeah. So that way you can intentionally be like, okay, I want to spend approximately 1 hour on Instagram per day. how can I do this effectively? Well, you can do approximately 60 interactions per hour without the Instagram algorithm thinking that you're some kind of a bot or something, or whatever the numbers are. I'm just kind of pulling stuff out, right? But you can intentionally set that and say, okay, well then every 2 hours roughly, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on Instagram. I'll set an alarm on my phone that in 2 hours it'll go off, and then the next available time that I have 5 minutes after that, I'll sit down and I'll go and interact with the people that interacted on my recent episodes or whatever for 5 minutes. I'll set a timer. When that timer's up, I'm done. I'll set another timer that in 2 or 3 hours I'll do this again. And then you're spacing it out. You're only spending 30 minutes a day on social media, but you're actually doing it very intentionally, and you can get it done. Versus if you sit there and you're trying to work on it, but you're 45 minutes in, that's when all of a sudden you're not even realizing you're on the Explore page doing whatever. You know what I mean? And that the app is built that way for that reason. So it just depends. If you're intentional, you don't have to spend as much time, I don't think.
You know what I love about what you just said? The 2-3 hour thing. I'm like, why does that time interval sound so familiar? Oh, I have a newborn, and she gets fed every 2 to 3 hours. So I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, either right before or right after. Like that can be like a thing, right, that I can implement, because I am very, structured when it comes to things. So that makes sense to have, that makes sense that if I'm aware of this issue, to have some structure around it to make sure that it doesn't, engulf me, because as we know, there's some very, as I mentioned yesterday again, very smart and, I wouldn't use the word evil, but like smart people who have done things right to these platforms to really work in special ways to keep us in there longer than we feel like we want to be. So
well, you got to play the game, right? So Instagram, what it wants to do, this is my really brief spiel, is what Instagram wants from you is for you to be on the app as much as possible, right? For as long as possible, and bringing other people to the app for as long as possible. So if you want Instagram to work with you, you have to play what their game is, right? So what do you think Instagram would prefer? Would they rather you be on 1 hour a day at one block, or would they rather you be on 1 hour a day spaced out throughout the day? Right?
Probably the latter.
Spaced out throughout the day, because it shows that you're continuously showing interest. You're continuously opening the app and coming back to it. So even though you're spending the same amount of time on it, Instagram will favor you because you're doing that. Right? So that's what I'm saying, is it's more just like thinking smart of like, how is this set up? How can I use that to my advantage? Because all of us creators know we don't want to spend as much time on social media as we do. Like we really don't. So how can we be just as effective in a smaller period of time? Because like I said, eliminating entirely is, man, I mean, you can, and I could see from the mental health standpoint for sure, because I've taken breaks from it, but it will make it really hard to get your word out about things, unless you have like a really big pocketbook to be putting, your show on billboards and things like that.
That's so you're going to pay some way with your time / attention, or, or money wise. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask a question about podcasting with you. So actually, before we even, later on, I'm going to ask you a question. Maybe you put it in the back of your mind. I want to know like maybe 1 or 2 podcasts that inspired you. Maybe ones that inspired you to start one yourself, or ones that you currently listen to kind of give you some, perspective. So we'll go to that question later. But I want to start with like sort of your journey. You mentioned before, I think you said about, was it 5 years ago that you started this podcast, right?
No, I was coming up on 3. It was when my store was 5 years old.
Got you. Okay. And so something about being able to have conversations, like for me, and record them and be able to share them with other people to be inspired by, there's something really special about it, because like I've had talks with many people lately where it almost feels like a master class. Yeah. And I'm like learning directly from someone who probably has services that people pay him or her to teach them. Like I had this guy from YouTube called Nick Nimmin, who's like a YouTube guru, knows a lot about the platform algorithm, all that kind of stuff. And so I had him on, and like a few months ago, and he's watched some of my content, some of my music stuff, and he was like, Kevin, he said, if I had your musical talents, he's like, I would do, and he like proceeded to like break down exactly what I need to do if I want to be big on YouTube. And I'm like, yo, this is super helpful. And I was like super appreciative of that type of thing. So I'm sure you've had similar types of conversations in your 9 seasons worth. So tell me a little bit about like, what that means to you, being able to have those types of connections with people you said you're still friends with now. how has that sort of been like an additional sort of value add to just having a podcast in itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it comes down to, I guess, initially is I'm genuinely inspired by the conversations. That's why it inspires other people, right? And
Yeah.
I'm genuinely very interested in all these people. Otherwise, I wouldn't be interviewing them. I'm
Yeah.
not just interviewing any random person that's in my area because, I need an episode for Wednesday.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do my show in seasons so that way I can take as much time as it takes to do the season the way that I want it to, get it all
Yeah.
edited and ready to go, and then put them out. So I'm like fairly selective about it. And I try to have guests from kind of like all different industries and stuff, but it's just the entrepreneurship mind of like, I want to know how can I improve. I kind of felt after I hit 5 years with my business that I had plateaued a little bit. That learning curve had slowed down. All the problems or anything that would come up anymore with my business, the vast majority of them are things I've already been familiar with, like they came up before. So the ideas started, not flowing as much. I'm like, I need some more juice. I need to learn more things. And so as I started doing the show, I found that, man, I'm learning so much about a lot of things, not just business, but life, like all kinds of things from these people because they're people I respect, and we're like-minded. Therefore, their advice and how they live their life, it's something that I can take bits and pieces from and say, oh, I love how you do this. I can put that, for me. And I do agree. I've interviewed a lot of people that for sure, you would pay them X dollars amount for a 1 hour one-on-one conversation to ask whatever questions you want. For sure, people would pay for that,
Yeah.
And so if I can ask those types of questions, because they're going to benefit me, I get this masterclass for free, and I get to share it with the world. I think it helps a lot of people. My story is only, I think, because I already had built up a business in a creative space that obviously isn't based on money, and I do things that I care about and I'm passionate about and I'm established in that kind of way. It built that initial level of respect with my guests that they understand, like, I've been through that already. I'm not just some random kid out of college that's like, I'm gonna do this, which good for them. But like, I've actually done it, So there's a mutual respect, there when I reach out to them in the first place. And then as we have that conversation, it's a lot more natural. It doesn't come across like they're teaching me. It doesn't come across like, a lot of podcasts, they tend to, kind of brag about the guest constantly the whole time. They're just kind of like kissing ass, which it doesn't make that person sound very real. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't come across as a peer. They seem like somebody out of reach that the person listening can't ever get to. Versus my show, I try to get them to be relatable as like peers and say, well, if this person can do this really cool thing, there's no reason why I can't get to that point too. You know what I mean? So I have these conversations and I learn all kinds of stuff from all kinds of like different areas. And I've learned social media stuff because I've had people in that space. I've had people big in like acting, so understanding how the entertainment industry works or whatever. You can learn something from everybody, but there's some people you can learn way more from. And thankfully I get to spend a lot of time talking to those people. So I get to learn a lot, and then naturally people who listen to the show get to learn too. And it's not because of me, it's because of, the other people that I'm asking questions of.
Right, the stuff that's being shared, man.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what Chris was like growing up, like a younger version of you. I know you were into skateboarding, but let's even maybe take it a little bit before you got into skateboarding. Like growing up, who were you as a kid?
Well, the crazy part is I'm like a super townie where I live now. Everyone thinks like when they move away, they're going to like, this grass is going to be way greener over in New York City or whatever, And so I always thought I would move, and I left and found that I just loved it here. And I've been here pretty much my whole life. The house that I'm in right now, I actually sold my first house when I got divorced and bought the house I grew up in. So this is the house my parents bought when I was 2 years old. So I'm like still there. Granted, I've renovated it and made it my own, but
Sure.
So yeah, I grew up on the west side of my little town here. I went to a Catholic elementary school through 6th grade, which was great. I mean, I think the smaller class sizes and whatnot were really helpful. I have a sister who's 2 years older than me who did really, really well in school. She has her doctorate degree in psychology and works for Google, making a whole pile of money now. She's was valedictorian, all that. So I was kind of the 3.5 grade point average rather than the 4.0. The younger brother who didn't care as much about school was still, good at it, but was more of a social being. So I did sports and all that type of stuff. And then by the time I, became, a conscious age where I decided whether or not religion was a thing for me, it wasn't. I decided I wanted to go to public school, and I thought there was better opportunities there. So I could be in advanced classes for, like, I was 2 years ahead in math, so there's other opportunities, creatively and stuff too. So I went to public school after that, graduated from high school in 2008. It was when I was like 9 or 10 maybe that skateboarding became a thing. I always played sports. Like I always was active, you know?
Yeah.
But I hate saying that it's because of the Tony Hawk video game series, because I don't know for sure if that's the case. But any major media is how kids discover things, right?
Sure.
Like regardless of what it is. You'll see like, you know, when that show, The Queen's Gambit, came out on Netflix, all of a sudden everyone's buying chessboards, right? So
Yeah, definitely.
when the Tony Hawk video game series came out in like 99 or whatever year that was, it was massive. Everyone played those games, right? So naturally,
good.
every kid wanted a skateboard, and I was one of those kids that got a skateboard. So I was like 9 or 10, skated, you know, a bit, but I didn't have a good group of friends to skate with yet. There wasn't anyone in my neighborhood really. And then when I got to high school, I wasn't good enough to play on any sports teams. And I just knew it. Like I played basketball from kindergarten all the way up, and I was the third best on my team, meaning I was not going to be good enough to play even on JV, which is its own conversation. But it was like, okay, well, I guess I'm not doing that, you know? And so the first day of high school, they put us in these little pods of like freshman orientation, and they asked us all what we wanted to be, you know? And there was another kid that said pro skateboarder, and it was like, oh, we're going to be best friends now, you know? And so from then on, I skated every day. You know, and it was shortly after that I started riding the city bus downtown instead of the school bus home. And we would meet at the skateboard shop that used to exist called Underloud. That was like the clubhouse then, you know, and this was before everyone had cell phones where you're texting each other on social media and whatever. So we'd meet down at the skate shop. Once we had 3 to 5 of us kids, then we would go skate around town, get kicked out of every spot because skateboarding is illegal and cops were way, you know, gnarlier about it back then. And then we go back to the shop and hang out and annoy the owners and then go skate, you know, and it just kind of became the whole thing. And it was at that point that it was like, man, I want to own a skateboard shop. Like, I don't need to be a pro skateboarder, but I want to have one of these. Like, this is what's really, really cool for me. And then, from there, it just started, got sales jobs, kind of worked in sales all the way up through, went to college for business, realized you don't need a degree to sell things. So it's kind of pointless. So I dropped out of college, worked at K Jewelers. I was an assistant manager for Helzberg Diamonds and then an assistant manager for Verizon before I was like, this it's not money that I enjoy about this. It's talking to people that I enjoy. But right now, as I had climbed further along that route, the focus with talking to people was no more about like learning about them. It was how do we leverage money out of these people? How do we get them to sign up for these programs? And all this stuff I felt greasy and horrible about. And so I didn't even make it a year working for Verizon before I was like, I just can't. I feel like this company is making the world worse and I'm contributing and I can't do it. You know what I mean?
Wow. I got to say about Tony Hawk, it took everything in me not to interrupt when you said Tony Hawk, because I was gonna bring that up earlier when you were talking about skateboarding, how much I loved that whole series, and of course you know about the warehouse, the like first level, and there's so much. Oh man, there's so many great memories with that game. That it was just so much fun. I never skateboarded myself, so I was one of the anomalies who played the game, played the crap out of that game so much, but never got into skateboarding or anything like that. And there's something that's very powerful to me and to others who are passionate about something, which is 100% of your guests and 100% of the people who are chatting with each other right now, about like seeing something or being exposed to something when you were younger, in your case the skate shop, skateboarding, and specifically the skate shop, and you having an idea that you want to do this at some point, and then you did a whole lot of other things before coming full circle and being there. And that's very, I think, profound. And maybe, I don't know how often it happens, or maybe it happens very often or maybe not very often, but the fact that like you had that idea, did all these things, and then said, this is where it has to be incredibly rewarding, that like being able to look back, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it just takes, in America, we just kind of like follow along the path in front of us, and we really don't take a lot of time to reflect. One thing that I always tell people, like some of the best advice I could possibly give, if you care to listen to my advice, is if you have enough time to spend even 10 minutes a day to just like turn off everything and just sit or go for a run or do whatever, so your mind can just be calm, so you have time specifically just to reflect on like, am I going where I want to? Like, is what I'm doing right now still going along the path towards where I want to be? Those types of questions. If you have enough time to just sit down for 10 minutes a day and do that, your life's going to be so much better for you. Because the problem is most people never stop, right? They just keep going, and they don't think like, did I really want to be an assistant manager at this store? No, it's not something they thought about. They just started at this job, and as the opportunities presented themselves, they're like, well, naturally, I want that position because that gives me more status and money. So I'm going to go there. I never thought I would work in jewelry. It was just I had an opportunity to make more money selling that versus whatever. So you just kind of climb that way. A lot of times it takes somebody having something kind of big happen in their life for them to sit and reflect and go, okay, wait a second. And that's what it was like I said, my parents split up. My dad had a heart attack, should have died. He ended up spending 9 weeks in the ICU waiting for a heart transplant. And so like while seeing that kind of mortality plus having my first child, it was like, well, so life could be gone overnight. Financial stability that my parents had was kind of gone overnight through something like that. So is financial stability important to me? Or, if I died, would I be like proud of what I'm leaving behind for my daughter? Like what stories they would tell about me? And it was like, man, not really. So what am I doing? What do I want to actually do? And then you can start going through that. And, talking to inspiration, people being exposed to seeing these things, that's what inspires them, right? So if you look at like the Tony Hawk video game, or if you look at Viva La Bam or the EA Skate game or whatever, any of these like pop culture things now, the Olympics, people seeing other people doing that inspires them to try to do that. If they have any juice in the first place, any interest, right? That's what is the trigger for them. That's what's so cool about the show, is there's a lot of people out there that are like just kind of going about their business waiting for something to come along that gives them that trigger to say, you know what, I've always wanted to be a writer. Why am I not writing? I could just do a blog that doesn't even go, that no one listens to, and I would love it. Or like I showed you off mic, I was painting these shoes. I didn't start painting until I was like late 20s because for whatever reason I thought I couldn't be an artist, right? And so it just takes some kind of a trigger. And the goal is hopefully the show, somebody comes across it, they listen to an episode just because they like this person that I interviewed, right? They're a fan of that person. They listen to it and they're on their way driving to their corporate job or whatever, or they're on their way to their college class, or they're on their way to wherever they're going that isn't really in the direction they want long term. It's just what they fell into. And they go, man, I don't have to do this. Like there's something else that I want to do, and hopefully the show, that's what gives them that trigger to say, okay, I need to go in that direction. Because even if I never make money doing that, that's what really makes me happy. Like that's what brings me joy. That's what makes me feel fulfilled. I need to start going along that path.
Bro, so the what's so powerful about what you're doing here is that you might relate to me in that when you found your passion and you saw what it's done for you in your life, which is it made you undeniably happier and more fulfilled and just more purpose, driven life. I'll not say that you probably, I'll let you say if you did or not, but when I discovered that, I was very eager to inspire people, other people in my circle, to do the same by talking to them about it, by asking them questions about their passion, and trying to galvanize them, right, in order to kind of figure that thing out. Because I know what it's done for me. I think everyone probably has some level of passion somewhere. Maybe some people haven't found it yet. But what I learned is that was challenging to do, right? It was like a thing where it has to, I think, definitely come from within. And the fact that you're having the conversations with people, knowing that you're going to be able to reach, an audience that's vast because of the very nature of the show, right? With like different
Right.
guests in different walks of life and stuff. And so you're doing something that's deliberately going to have that impact in people's lives without actually having that direct conversation with someone, which a lot of people, quite frankly, in my experience, they don't necessarily, want to hear that. It's like kind of
Yeah.
closed-mindedness type thing, because we're doing something that's different than the norm. It's becoming more norm now. You're seeing a lot more
Yeah.
people today, follow their passions. When I have talks with people about anything, that I see a glimmer of excitement in their eyes, the way that I had about, have about music, about my YouTube channel, stuff like that, that gets me probably more hyped than almost anything else. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's awesome. Tell me more. Like I feel you here, And so you
Yeah.
probably could relate to that, right?
Yeah. I mean, the unfortunate part is there's like two effects from it, right? You get the effect where these people feel like they're being called out. Like I'm looking down upon them because I'm doing something I care about and they chose not to. They want to, but they ultimately thought about it and went, that's the harder route. And for me, it's just not what I want. And that's totally okay. That doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. I've been told by a lot of people that I'm extremely intense to be around, right? I make a lot of eye contact when I talk to people. I'm very inquisitive, and I am the same way. When I see somebody talk about something they care about, my entrepreneurship mind, and because of what I do, I'm immediately like, how can you do it though? Like, how do we do this? What are the problems? Why aren't you doing it? Let's talk about those problems and find solutions. You know what I mean? And it's very intense. A lot of people, on the flip side of it, find that to be very inspiring. I have a lot of friends and stuff around me, my employees and other people that are like, man, I love being around you. You inspire me to be the best version of myself. So you see both. Unfortunately, you have to understand and respect people's boundaries when you talk to somebody, that if you just want to be their friend, you're not necessarily, they're not looking for a role in that friendship of you mentoring and pushing them to do anything or helping them do whatever. That's not what they want to do. You have to be able to recognize that this person isn't somebody listening to the show that's looking for this out of this relationship. I got to scale it back. But it is really hard for me to do, because when I see somebody doing something that they don't care about, which I have a really good friend that recently kind of gave up on the mission they were on. And it's been just like, I've talked to my partner about this a lot, and I'm like, this is just crushing my soul to watch this happen. This friend of mine is now just working for a corporate company, and every time I hang out with her, she just talks about like money, where money is taking her, how this job is gonna, and what she did before was not money based at all, but it was hard, but I did think it benefited the world. So when I'm hanging out with her and I see she's just kind of given up on that hope is gone out of her eyes, it like bothers me. But I have to try to just remember, this is another adult who has their own path, that wants to do their own things, and it's not right or wrong. So, but it's hard. I struggle with it for sure.
Oh, 100%, man. And I'm inclined to say this right now. So, in terms of being inspired, I can say for sure, when you told me about the shop that you have and the mission that you have with the shop and what you do there, it inspired me. Because right now with my tutoring business, everything currently is virtual. Right, I have two people that are working for KMATs, one other math tutor and one English language arts tutor. I do math and piano, and everything is virtual now. From before, we were doing in-person stuff before pandemic, and now everything's virtual.
Sure.
I know that as a former teacher for 2 years, my first year teaching middle school math was the best year working anywhere professionally, and nothing else comes close, because I loved every second of being in the school, and interacting in person with students was unbelievable. Second year during COVID, when I was teaching, which was my last year teaching, because my love of teaching went down and my demand for tutoring kind of went up, so I had to make that decision. Finished the year strong, but then kind of ended the teaching thing professionally there. But at the end of that year, we had to go back in school to administer our final exams. And what was so profound for me, and I'll never forget it until I get to a point where I circle back to the point of this anecdote here. But I'll never forget that feeling of going back into the school and seeing the students. And I wasn't even teaching this day. All I'm doing is standing up there, seeing the kids and joking with them a little bit after having a full year of doing virtual stuff. Now we can kind of have a little fun, before the test, and then hand the tests out. But just being in their presence was like, it was a trigger for me. A light bulb was, I need to have a center. I need to have a place for KMATs. And what sort of transpired from that moment was doing research, finding different opportunities, and there was having a actual shop kind of thing if I wanted to do that, which is definitely more expensive than having like one of those office buildings that have like different areas there, different rooms that you can rent and stuff. So the long and short is, I had to put either or both of those on hold, because that's when we were pregnant, and I wanted to make sure things were where they needed to be before making any serious changes. But now we're getting back into a flow and having conversations with my wife, and even talking to you now, I'm thinking about how amazing that's going to be when I do get a place. And now I'm thinking, like, what you're describing is different than my original thought. My original thought was go the more inexpensive route, have a place in a building. But now I'm like, and maybe that is the first step. Maybe that's the first step that segues into a actual. But how amazing would it be to like have a place call my own, and and kids can come and we can do the tutoring and stuff there. So you got the as you can see, the hamster wheel kind of turning right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's limitless possibilities with it, right? That's the beautiful thing about owning a business is there's nobody telling you what you can and can't do. You can spend your time doing anything. You know, you can have a space that's meant for tutoring, but you can also have it open for renting, right? Where you can have school clubs or something come and use the space when you don't have time to be there, right? And just have cameras or whatever. You could have equipment and stuff there, similar to kind of how they have collaboration workspaces, where it's like you pay a membership and all of these instruments and all this equipment is here for you to learn and use and do whatever. You know what I mean? It's like there's so much potential to do whatever it is that you want to do. And I do think that having that physical location where you speak with people, you know, that like home base, I do think that is really important. People ask me if I'm ever going to get rid of my store, and I'm like, no. You know, kind of regardless of how big the show gets, which I do think it will get to be pretty big, where I don't necessarily need to be in my store, but I don't think I'll ever walk away from the store because that really is where my heart is in the first place. You know what I'm saying? So we'll see where everything eventually goes, but it's important. When I was talking to Ian Allison, especially about it, he made the point, and we talk about it fairly often, of sitting down and saying, okay, well, what is it that I really want out of life, you know? And for him, in context with his conversation, he's a bass player. His conversation was, his dream wasn't to play the bass and make money getting famous playing the bass, right? His dream was, how do I play the bass for a living? It wasn't going on tour internationally with major stars necessarily. That was one way to do it, but there's other ways to do that, right? And so that's how he was able to settle down in Minneapolis and have a family and teach and do all these other things once he took the ego portion out of it and said, okay, well, that's not actually what I want, you know? So that's the important question, right? Is saying like, okay, well, what is it that I really want to do? I want to build this community space. I want to be able to teach. I want to be able to whatever. And then try to brainstorm and figure out, okay, well, what things can I do to make this a reality? There's probably a lot of ways to do it, right? Because it's probably not one thing. It's probably 6 pieces that you're figuring, how do we fit these quite together? 10% of my time's on this, 35% on this, and we kind of meld it to be able to make all of these things possible. But it takes a lot of like sitting down and thinking about it, you know, to figure out like how to do that. And then as you open the business or go down that path, kind of feeling where the winds are going and realizing, hey, I wanted to go directly this way, but there's a building my way. I kind of got to navigate this a little bit and change direction and figure out how do I still get there. Does that make sense?
It does. This turned into one of the master classes that we alluded to earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, nah, man, that's real. And one thing that I didn't really respond to, that I'm just remembering that you said earlier that was so important, is that 10-minute, the best advice you could have given, like you said earlier, the 10 minutes of like taking time to just have your phone off, have everything off, and just kind of think. And this is a reminder that I needed, because years ago I remember watching an interview with a rapper, J. Cole. He was being interviewed by, I think, Andy Martinez, like when his album was coming out, and he was talking about how critically important meditation was for him. And I was like, man, I never really thought about, how important meditation is, but I was like, I need to try that, because he's saying that it's like it changed everything for him. So I want to like incorporate that. And that was like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I haven't done it at all yet. And I've had many reminders like this about how important it is. I think it's a bit of a paradox, because just like you said, you were saying earlier about people who, who feel like they have to be super efficient with their time and always doing something. That kind of does describe me. Like if I'm washing dishes, I'm probably listening to a podcast. If I'm going for a walk, I'm probably talking to someone on the phone. And that's cool to do sometimes. But yes, man, having that 10-minute or whatever you can afford, is so important, because it's gonna clear your mind and give you an opportunity to think about some of the things that you were just talking about. Have I sat down and thought about the center and about, oh, you were just talking about music equipment? How cool will it be? And I have thought about this particular thing, but how cool will it be to have a place that I'm either renting or that I buy, the actual storefront, that is, in my case, it's encompassing all the 3 things that I do. Thing number 1, tutoring, math, education, English language arts. Thing number 2, music, recording music, vibing with people, music, doing like a jam session, stuff like that. Thing number 3, recording these conversations, but now having a place to do them physically at, and I don't want people necessarily coming to the house and stuff. So that's like three things that I'd be able to really effectively utilize the space for, and that's part of the reason why I was like, it's kind of a no-brainer to have a place so I can utilize for those three purposes.
Yeah, well, and if you're trying to be hyper productive, you got to remember too, like if you don't stop and make a plan for what you're doing, are you really being hyper productive or are you just filling your time? You know what I'm saying? It's about using your time intentionally. Because if you're spending, it's that idea of you never get something done to 100%, right? People who are work for themselves, they get everything done to 95% because you can in 1 hour you can get 95% of the project done. To get 100%, it's going to take 6 hours, and you just can't spend that much time doing that. But if you're just aimlessly still trying to get it done, you're spending a lot of time that should be spent somewhere else. So I do actually think you're more productive if you take that 10 minutes of time, just because you're not spending your time doing the wrong things anymore. You know what I'm saying? And it's not just from like a productivity standpoint of like, this is the fastest way that I can accomplish this individual goal, but more so on like the grander scheme of your life. Like, what is important to me in today? How do I make sure that I'm using my time intentionally today to reach the things that I want to reach, which could just be simply like, I want to be less stressed. What things can I do today to make sure that I'm relieving stress, whether it's eating healthier or whatever those, the case may be. So because I'm in the same boat. I always have too many things to get to that I never get them all done. But thankfully, I've kind of gotten to a point now where I'm so desensitized and used to having a forever to-do list that I don't get stressed out about it. I'm just, work on it as I have time. I work all the time, but everything I do for work is something that I would probably do for free if I had a regular job. You know what I mean? Like they'd all be hobbies, which is tight, but I could easily burn myself out doing them because I know I have more to do. So the big thing that I've gotten better at slowly is just being kind to myself and saying, you do this because you enjoy it. Yes, you still have to make money. So there's like, you have to consider that, but still you do this because you enjoy it. Don't push yourself so hard that you're not enjoying it anymore, because then it defeats the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
100%. Tell me about think about a day in your very interesting life. You mentioned three things. You mentioned the shop. You mentioned I guess not a council person, but like you're involved with the town officially, and obviously your show. So like you have a lot going on. There's probably other things, and you're a father, right? There's like things that you have going on. So like, pick a day out of this past week or past month that's been, that you've done several things, including maybe recorded an episode. But just like walk me through what like an average day would be like in your life.
Oh, I mean, it's tough because every day is a little bit different because you can't really fit all of those things into one day, right? You figure out like during the week when you have time to do whatever. And so like with my show, with recording, it's not, a lot of times I fly to LA and I book a hotel room in Hollywood. A lot of times I'll stay because it's kind of central, and I'll have all my guests lined up and I'll do 7 interviews in, 4 or 5 days, right? And now that's all the interviews that I need to do for however long of a period of time. Again, that's just being intentional and saying, okay, I can get a lot of work done in a short period of time by doing this, because there's so many creative people that aren't even from Los Angeles that are based there, right? So it's a little bit different from that standpoint. But my typical day, when I got divorced, I bought myself a hot tub because everybody needs to buy one stupid thing. But it's been the best decision ever. I've had it for 1.5 years. I sat in it before I was on this call. But I wake up, I get my kids ready for school, pour my cup of coffee, sit in my hot tub, and that's when I handle all my social media stuff, or a lot of it for the day. I go and I check through all my emails and I respond to all the DMs and I do whatever. Get done with that, and then I get out and I usually run whatever errands I have to do because I open my store at noon. So I'll go stop wherever, or I'll schedule calls like this, that type of thing. So I'll do that, go to my store for a few hours, handle the things that I have to handle as the owner, hopefully be able to just talk to some customers and stuff too. And then after I leave there, I'm usually only there for a few hours of the day. That's when I try to schedule interviews and things like that typically. But it changes, like this morning I have this, and then right after this I go to my store. When I'm done with that, I have to go meet with a past guest that's also an advertiser on the show to talk about some giveaway things and business stuff. And then I have to ship out these shoes that I painted for somebody because I got commissioned to do some painting. So I got to do that. Tomorrow morning, I have a doctor's appointment in the morning after I do the social media stuff. Then I'm at my shop, and then I have my Parks and Waterways meeting with the city. So I got to go do that. Thursday morning, I have to go meet with a different potential advertiser that owns this like body care company before I go to the shop. So I'm just always filling my time doing different things with like whatever the priority is as I have time. You know, if I have open creative time, I'm typically painting. But even when I'm painting, I'm usually listening through an episode to get rid of ums or whatever, to edit it down a little bit better, or I'm watching through it, you know, on Premiere Pro, and I'm cutting out little clips that are little, you know, little gems of advice that I can post on Reels or whatever. It's like I multitask a lot. I wish I had more time to just relax. I don't sit and watch movies or play video games very often. I'm like always kind of running.
Yeah, man. Okay, that was. I'm sitting here just listening because that's really, it's really interesting to me because like
Sure.
the way you said it, it's like the advertising stuff is very interesting. So I want to touch on that for a second. So these are people maybe that, or companies that maybe reach out to you or vice versa about having like the way that I understand it works, like having their like sponsor for the podcast. Is that what it kind of is?
Yeah, I mean, there's both to it, right? If you want to do something on a professional level, you have to make an income from it. It's just not possible to dedicate that much time to something that you don't make money to unless you're doing it for charity. I do things for charity. We have a fund I call Skateboards for Kids where people donate money to the fund. That's a separate savings account through my store. We use that money to buy skateboards and like the pieces and stuff for them at a wholesale cost. So I don't make any money on it. And then in turn, I donate those. So we donate them to like the homeless shelter for families in the area and for schools and stuff like that, right? That's charity time. The podcast takes too much time for it to be charity time. I have to make money on it. Then you have to look and say, okay, well, how do I make money on something without like losing the vision and compromising it, right? So I can't just go on Anchor like a lot of people do and run whatever advertisements they want to push, because now I'm advertising for companies that don't align with my values and beliefs. So I can only really work with those advertisers, which are other creative entrepreneurs like myself that I genuinely believe in. Those are the people that I want to work with and advertise for. Those people don't have very much money, naturally, because if you do something like what we do, you don't make a lot of money. That's not the point, right? So I have to have a lot of meetings with people like that to be able to have any kind of funding. As far as like being on the show, you know, everything in a business relationship has to be mutually beneficial. It just has to be, right? And both parties have to feel good about it. Otherwise, it's not something sustainable that's going to last. You know, even if it's a one-time thing, you're not going to be able to ask that person to connect you with somebody else or open other doors if it wasn't mutually beneficial. So if my show in my area has a larger audience than the guests that I'm interviewing in my area, now it's not mutually beneficial, right? Because their audience probably already is aware of my show. So I'm not getting new eyes and ears on my show at all. And I'm talking about a topic that is along my values and belief system for sure. And it's a creative entrepreneurship space and it still makes sense, but it's not the best for me for growing my show. There's other people that have really inspiring stories doing creative, cool things that have their own audiences in different parts of the country or different parts of the world. That would be better for me. So that means we have to figure out, so how do we make this mutually beneficial? Because I get people reach out to be on the show all the time. That's like the super common thing, right? It's not on purpose. It's the secondary effect, but it's great promotion to be a guest on a show, right? Especially if it's on the radio and stuff in my area for local businesses. It's not intentionally an advertisement, but it's definitely a huge advertisement. So they're going to want to be on the show. How much would they pay for an advertisement normally for something like that? I'm not going to charge that, but they're going to have to pay some kind of money. So I do interview local small businesses periodically on my show that I do still think that their story aligns with my value and belief system. I do still think they're inspiring. Otherwise, I wouldn't do the episode. But they will pay, you know, a certain amount of money to be on the show. And these are the things that they get along with it. That the show airs on the radio twice locally on these stations and airs. You see what I'm saying? But you have to do that. You know, and I think people understand if something's going to be done on a professional level and they're watching it for free or they're listening to it for free, somebody's paying for it. Who's paying for it? An advertisement, probably, right? I think people respect the fact that I only advertise for people that I do genuinely believe in. If I tell you like, hey, this episode's brought to you by Hop and Barrel, my beer sponsor, right? That's my actual friends, Justin and Brian, that I like to go bar hopping with, that own a brewery nearby that is a really cool creative space. They have like local wrestling matches there, and they have like cool shows and comedy, and like I do actually believe in their business and think it's rad, which is why I promote them. But if you're not doing advertisements on your show, how are you making money? So you know what I'm saying? It's an important part of the business side. You have to have a business mind. You can't. What I always tell people, my people will ask me what my goals are, right? And financially, anyways, my goals are to be able to create freely, be financially free to just create and have nothing else dictate how I create what I create. I'm not quite at that point yet. So you have to fandangle things a little bit and say, okay, well, how do I make these things? Like, how do we make this work in the bigger picture? How does this work? And you find ways to do that. For me, I'm on the radio twice a week on one of the local radio stations, and I program it in, which means I can also program in as much or as many radio advertisements as I want. And that's how I pay myself to be on the radio, because the radio station is volunteer. So I could just air it and not put any radio ads at all, which I'm sure some people would prefer. But I have kids to pay for. I have a house to pay for. And if I don't run these advertisements and pay for me to do this, that means I can't create this. And I still genuinely believe, even with advertisements, what I do helps a lot of people. So it's just kind of part of the beast.
That's super helpful to hear, because I mean I'm still pretty far myself. I mean, my YouTube channel is monetized, but in terms of like now starting to put a little bit more attention into the actual podcast perspective here, specifically, like I'm kind of literally yesterday was like going through old episodes on my YouTube channel, from not old, but like more of the recent ones, but ones that I haven't yet converted to a podcast, and taking those and putting them on the platform that more people, I think, would see more value in this type of content versus YouTube, where there's so much other stuff going on that the interview type thing on YouTube is not as big. Unless if you're talking to someone, like I know you checked out some of my Frank Tedesco conversation.
Yeah, I watched that one. Yep.
Which is and you asked a really good question. You were like, how did that one do better? And I was like excited. I still am. I'm like, damn, that's like 13,000 views. That means that a lot of people watched, like, specifically, like, that's really amazing to me. It's like I loved that conversation so much. I learned so much about how to things to like start learning how to play a song back, like from the end.
Yeah, that was
to
genius.
the beginning. Wasn't that so cool? I'm like, I never thought of that before, and it just made a ton of sense.
No, I always think that way with business. I tell people the same thing. Look at where your end goal is. Rather than looking at the foot in front of you, look at where the end is. When you ride a bike, you don't look down at your front tire and 3 feet in front of it. You look down the road where you're going, and then you can navigate how to get to that space. It's the same kind of way when you're talking about playing the song. It's the same mentality anyways, of like, I know where I want to be and I know where I want my focus to be. So let's start tackling that. A lot of people say, like, where do you want to be in 3 years? Act that way right now. Just be that person right now. And that's how you start to get to that point. I think that's super wise advice. And I agree. I think that episode, regardless of the fact I'm not involved in music in any kind of way, really. I mean, I interview people in music periodically, but I think it was incredibly helpful. The guy's a genius for sure.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, I appreciate that, and yeah, I was so gracious, to have him on. And just hearing a little bit about the background from the podcast perspective of how it is a business and how you have the goal to be able to eventually, like you said, create freely. Like that's kind of what it's definitely all about. So tell me about one or two podcasts that either inspired you and or ones that you currently listen to.
I don't listen to a ton of other podcasts because I like to research my guests pretty deeply before I interview them. Because typically a lot of the people I've interviewed, they've been interviewed a lot of times before, right? And so I don't want to ask the same questions that they've been asked before, because then when they, post to their social media like, hey, I did this interview with Passion Pod, you should go check it out, it's going to be the same questions. Their listeners and their followers don't care to hear those same questions. So as an example, I just interviewed Chris Cruzy. He got second place on that show, The Voice, a while back. He's from my zone. He's like a billboarding country music, dude. And I started the interview. I said, welcome to the show or whatever. And I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to summarize what I know about you, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong on anything. And he's like, okay. And so I gave a quick, like 1.5 minute story. This is Chris's story that from what I know. And I go, did I get that right? And he goes, wow, that was really good. Cool. And I was like, tight. Now that we know all these things, because you've said them on other interviews, because people tend to say the same things when they get interviewed, they're put on the spot, so they go with whatever pops in their mind, right? That's just kind of how it works. Now that I gave that quick summary, I go back into it then and I ask them different questions, that still tell the story of their life, but making sure that I'm asking different things. Now that guest is way more excited because they're like, Chris put some effort into this interview. He takes this really seriously. He's a professional. I will connect him now with my other friend because I think that it's worth their time, And so that's how I've networked to get the guests that I've gotten. But because of that, the only reason I said that is because I listen to episodes other guests have been on. So when I listen to podcasts, it's not the podcasts I necessarily want to listen to. It's all the episodes of different shows that a guest I'm going to be interviewing has been on. That's what I tend to listen to. So it's not consistent. Before I had to spend as much time listening to other shows as well as my own to edit, I listened to the Nine Club. That's the biggest skateboarding podcast by far in the world. They've had Tony Hawk and everybody. They've even had Lil Wayne and stuff on there. It's a big show, and it's really cool because it's done by Chris Roberts. He's a professional skateboarder who's end of his career really at this point, but professional skateboarder. And then Roger Bagley's the co-host, and he's a videographer, like a cinematographer in the skateboarding industry, right? And then their other kind of bonus co-host who speaks in periodically, Kelly Hart, was a pro skateboarder, but he's a team manager within brands, right? So between the three of them, they kind of have all the perspectives of the industry as a whole. And since I own a skateboard shop, the industry is really interesting to me, not necessarily the professionals' careers. Those are interesting, and I've interviewed some pro skateboarders too, but the industry side, when they interview somebody that's a footwear designer within the skateboarding world, that I find to be really, really interesting. Or a cinematographer where I'm like, how do you even get the funding for these videos, and how do they put together what goes into them? And those are the types of questions, because of my industry, super interested in. Unfortunately, since I started doing my own show, I just don't, I'm always looking, how can I spend my time, most valuable, or how can I, do that? And listening to that show isn't the best value I get for my time typically in my mind. So I haven't been keeping up with it anymore. But yeah, that was the biggest one. Another skateboarding podcast called The Bunt Live. It's very similar, except it's a little bit more raw around the edges, a little rougher, a little more laid back. They don't care. They're not as careful about what they say. So they get different things out of the guests, because a lot of the guests have been on both shows, and the types of stuff you get from one are, a lot different than the other. So yeah, I like those shows, but otherwise there's none. I've tried listening to Rogan and stuff, and not my thing. It depends on the guests, obviously, but at that point I'm listening because of the guests, not because of the show necessarily.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Now I gotta say this, Ben. I'm definitely gonna respect your time. What time is it now? Yeah, Let's get ready to wrap up. But I just want to say a couple things. One is that I learned a tremendous amount. So I appreciate you, taking the time out. There's just a couple of highlights, about the inspired nature of everything that you're doing, and how the sentiment you mentioned about the things that you're doing are things that you probably would be doing as a hobby if you had another job. I think that's a dope way of putting it, man. It's wow, the positive is that your days are filled with things that you enjoy. The not negative, but the thing to be careful with is the burnout potential, as you mentioned, and the
Right.
fact that there's, kind of ongoing. I love how you said, I'm just throwing the highlights out there that's popping my head.
Sure.
I love how you said you got used to having a forever sort of list of things that you want to eventually get done. Because I think that's kind of where I'm at now. It's at a time I wasn't used to it. At a time I was list keeps getting bigger. I need to get to all these things, and now it's kind of adversely affecting the immediates that I need to get done.
Yeah.
And then just your thoughtfulness about how you approach your guests, and the way that you make it a point to make sure that after your guests leave, there's a positive lasting impression that comes from a sense of you doing the research, which takes time to do, and you have to want to do that in order to do a good job. But also just from talking to you for this hour plus now, it's you used the word, you said you're some people say you're intense, right? So
Yeah.
like the idea of you being genuine, being yourself, and it's like I met you today this way. I chatted with you a little bit before then, but I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I know who you are, and I think it's very important, right, to be genuine, especially when you're talking to a whole lot of different people. When they leave the episode, they're gonna leave feeling like that. I enjoyed that. And for me personally, when I hear that type of feedback from people, you can kind of tell probably
Yeah.
all episodes aren't the same. All meshing with guests aren't going to be identical. But I'm sure
Right.
you can like tell like when you're talking to someone and you're in person too. So I mean that's a
Right.
total different thing than the virtual thing that we're doing.
Which is why I do it in person too. It's just to get that really connection, that real connection. Not that this isn't great, because this is great and I've learned a lot from you as well. But in person, I prioritize that, and I know it costs me a lot of money, and it's worth the money. I interviewed this dude, Greg Gatsby. He's like a billboarding DJ out in LA. Dude's a genius and such a genuine, cool person. He's from Boston. Highly recommend that episode. But anyways, I interviewed him. Is it? Yeah. Did you like that one? Yeah. But after I interviewed him, dude let me crash on his couch. I slept on his futon and like kicked it. You know what I mean? Like being able to have those types of connections, and we still talk all the time. A lot of my past guests do, and it's those types of connections are a big reason why I enjoy doing what I do. Surrounding myself with people that inspire me as my personal friends and stuff, not from like a weird clout thing, but just like these are people that I like to be around because they make me happy. They inspire me. Like I'm excited to talk to these people every single time because I know I'm going to walk away from that conversation like juiced to go do something. And you can't, the whole thing of like, you have to be yourself because the best version of whoever you're trying to be, if it's not you, that person has that covered. You know what I mean? Like I can't be the best Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan. He's the best Joe Rogan. The best Chris Johnson, that's hard. There's a lot of people with that name. But you know what I mean? Like I'm the only I can be the best version of me. Nobody else can compete. So why shouldn't I go along that way? Like you have to. And you got to remember that you're not going to please everyone. Not everyone's going to love you. That's impossible. Even if you did everything 100% right, there's people in a bad mood that are just like not having it. So you got to be true to like this is who I am. This is what I want to do. This is what I think works or whatever. Be willing to kind of like go with the flow of things a little bit, but being true to yourself is the only way for it to work long term.
Yeah, man, that's so true. Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. Definitely, we're gonna keep in touch, and I'm very excited to get this episode out. I used to do live premieres on my YouTube channel, which is a feature that lets you publish a video, schedule a published video, and then promote it beforehand, and then people can join and watch it live for the first time, and then it becomes just a regular video after, and you can like
Sure.
chat and everything together. And I stopped doing that a while ago for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons that kind of the research that I did kind of taught me that it's not great to do because like the retention rate can be really low on those types of videos because you can't like fast forward, or some people like doing like playback speed times two and things like that. So like somehow the numbers can get messed up to the point where when you do other videos, like YouTube doesn't recommend it as much and stuff. So
Sure.
that was one reason. And then also the second reason, and I'm not ashamed at all to say it, it's like the anxiety of how many people are going to show up to watch together with me, and it like
Yeah.
affects my
Stressful.
mode. It absolutely, or my mood. It absolutely became a little bit stressful, like to the point where I'm like, man, like trying to promote it the right way and stuff. I think the intent was there because ideally, you and I, if our schedules permit, can be there chatting together. Some of my people can be there. Some of your people, we can chat about. Like the intent was there,
Right.
but I kind of put the brakes on that for now. But so now it's just regular releases. But yeah, man, I super very much enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking forward to listening to some more of your conversations, specifically the ones that you recommended before, and like the ones that are involved that revolve around other creators and people in the music space. 'Cause that's like what really moves me. And like I
Yeah.
said, I'm pretty sure what was the first name? Gatsby? Was it Chris Gatsby?
Greg Gatsby.
Greg. Pretty sure
Yeah.
that was the one that I listened to. That didn't finish it, but I like remember listening to a good chunk of it one night. I think I may have texted you that night or the next morning or something. to let you
Yeah.
know that like this is dope. I'm feeling this right here, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, like you said before, every guest is different. It's going to mesh differently. I've loved every episode, but there's definitely some episodes that I think performed better for a reason. And you can't let those things hit you too hard. It's just along the same way with the social media. Like you want to get more than X number of likes, or you want to get however many comments, and you want to set yourself up for success the best that you really can with it. But you can't once that ship sailed, you just got to let it be. Like obviously continue to promote the episode or whatever, but the way that it performs after that, it's kind of out of your hands, and you're not going to know, right? You didn't know that when you did that other episode with Frank, it was going to get 13,000 views versus the other episodes. It's going to hit or it's not going to hit. Either way, like, why did you do it? You did it because you enjoy these conversations. You do it because you think the people listening are going to find value in these conversations. Maybe only 50 people listen to an episode. That's still 50 people that stopped what they were doing. Like, imagine if you were standing on the street and you started speaking, 50 people stopped what they were doing and listened to you for over an hour. That's powerful. We're just used to seeing like higher numbers. So you're like, I want to have more. But even if the numbers perform really low, you still accomplished what you wanted to accomplish with it, right? And your time will come. If you continue to do the right things over and over and over again, like the audience will grow. People will discover it, right? Like, I've been doing the show a long time before you discovered the show. And now you're going back and listening to other episodes and saying, wow, this is cool, right? And if I continue to do it, just like how you're continuing to do it, somebody's going to discover your show through me being on. And they're going to go, I like this show a lot, and maybe they won't even listen to my show anymore. They'll listen to yours instead, But like people will, you'll gather more and more people as time goes by. But yeah, you can't let that anxiety of like whether or not this performs affect you too much. It's hard, but just like anything, as you continue to do it, you get desensitized, and it just doesn't have to be the focus animore. You got to learn to let go of that stuff. I'm still kind of struggling with it myself, but you have to.
That's powerful. Yeah, man. Yeah, totally. I definitely appreciate that. It's that's why it's cool to be able to relate to those types of things that many of us, definitely feel. Um I'm gonna give you back the rest of your time here, and I'll throw it out there. I just thought of you mentioned not being into music as much yourself. You're into the visual artistry, but I'm just gonna say it because if there's an opportunity to do something musical, that because I'm very much into the music space, whether it's
Sure.
combining something involving my music around your visual artistry and or show, I'm 1,000% down for that. These are the types of connections, just like you mentioned, like working with your past guests and stuff. Like these are the types of things that move me and generate like excitement with me and stuff. So we could take that conversation obviously offline. But if ever anything pops up in your head, you're like, yo, I need some music for this or whatever. Like,
Yeah, dude. I mean, so like I was saying before, I painted these shoes, right? So I'm not give people an idea. I paint these like kind of crazy monster things. But like posting stuff like that, any visual, you want to post it as a reel rather than a photo, right? You use a reel showcasing the shoes, and the music can be yours,
yeah,
and then we both win. You
yeah,
know? So
1,000% down for that. Let's make that happen.
cool.
For sure, man. Bro, thank you so much for the time. I know you're extraordinarily busy, man.
Aren't
So
we
I do appreciate it. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day and the rest of the week. I know you say you have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. You got meetings like today and
Yeah,
tomorrow and the
yeah.
rest of the week and stuff. So hope everything goes well. And yeah, definitely looking forward to continuing the conversations and stuff offline.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This was really enjoyable. If anybody heard something that I said and they want to correct me, or if they want to follow up with a question on something, Instagram's the best way to get a hold of me. It's just at PassionPod. It's pretty easy to find, a little skull and mic thing. You're obviously going to follow it too, but in general, like it's easy to get a hold of me. Instagram's the best spot. Send me a message. If I don't get back to you immediately, I will within a couple of days for sure.
Excellent. Sounds good, man. Thanks so much. And I'll holler at you on the next one, man.
All right,
All
later.
right.